I was lying there fighting for my life, torn open and stitched back together, when I heard the words that cut deeper than any scalpel. My parents stood over me and told the doctor, "Take his organ, save our son, do it now." My mother's voice didn't even shake when she added, "He's just a burden." They thought I was unconscious, that I couldn't hear them deciding my life was disposable. But I was awake. I heard everything, and they had no idea what I was about to do next. Before I share my story, I want to know you are here with me. Just say listening in the comments or let me know where you are. I love hearing how far my story reaches. Sometimes even the smallest connection can make a story feel heard. Thank you, and now here's my story. Please don't forget to subscribe to this channel. It means more than you know. My name is Valen Creed, and this is how I survived being treated like nothing more than a body to carve open. The rain on Blue Ridge Mountain sounded like it wanted to wash the road away. Each drop hammered against the windshield until the wipers struggled to keep up. I kept my eyes on the slick asphalt, my knuckles tight on the wheel, while the silver bracelet my grandmother had once slipped onto my wrist pressed cold against my skin. Beside me, Kellen was half laughing, half texting, his voice filling the cabin as he bragged about an internship our mother had lined up. I nodded as though I cared. Though I knew it wasn't for me, it never was. I was just the one who drove, the one who made myself useful while he sat golden in the glow of their pride. He even mentioned casually, almost smugly, that our blood types matched. O negative, universal, perfect for saving lives. He said it like a joke, but it landed heavy in my chest, a foreshadowing I didn't yet understand. The world ended in an instant. A flash of red, a truck's headlights blinding in the rain, the shriek of metal twisting, the airbag exploding like a fist, the smell of gasoline mixing with wet earth, then nothing. When I woke, it wasn't to familiar voices or a comforting touch. It was to the sterile hum of machines and the sting of stitches pulling at torn flesh across my abdomen. My mouth was dry, my throat raw. I heard a nurse say something brisk into a radio. Kidney case in recovery. Like I wasn't a person but a file number. Stable surgery. Partial nephrectomy. My body had already been altered while I was unconscious. I tried to shift, to ask, to reclaim some piece of myself, but I was weighted down by tubes and exhaustion. Through the glass wall, I saw them, my parents. Darlene adjusted her coat, her perfume lingering even from across the room. Victor stood behind her with his arms folded, eyes flat, detached. Their voices came soft, almost casual, but each word landed like a blade. "Take the other kidney," my mother said, like she was ordering dinner. "Save Kellen." "Do it now," my father added without hesitation. "He's just a burden." The doctor shook his head, his voice low but firm. "He won't survive." But it didn't matter. They wanted me emptied out, used up and gone. They thought I was sleeping. They didn't know my eyes were half open, my ears catching every word. I reached for my wrist, desperate for the cool anchor of the bracelet my grandmother had given me, but it was gone. My chest tightened. Had they taken even that? In the void left by its absence, something else took root. I swore silently, teeth gritted against the pain. If I lived through this, they would never take another piece of me again. Outside the glass, I heard the doctor mutter about surgical scheduling, about waiting until conditions were right. My blood went cold. They were already planning the next cut. That was the moment trust died, replaced by a raw, burning will to survive, not for them, but against them. Days blurred into one another in the hospital's gray light, but betrayal has a way of etching itself sharp. I spotted it first in a hallway mirror of polished steel. Mother brushing her hair back, her hand flashing a heavy gold ring under fluorescent light. I remembered the day she'd sighed over that exact ring in a magazine, shaking her head, saying it was far too expensive, that money like that had to be saved for Kellen's college fund. And yet, here it was now on her hand, gleaming like a confession. Later, passing the administrative desk, I caught whispers between two staff members who didn't know I was listening. "The payout from the accident came through last week," one murmured. "Family redirected the funds. Redirected away from me. Away from the medications and therapy I would need. Straight into their pockets. Straight into that ring." My skin went cold as I imagined forms signed without my name. My recovery bought and sold like a commodity. When May Ellington, an older nurse with steady hands, came to check my IV, she looked at me differently. Not like I was a burden, not like I was a donor in waiting, but like I was human. She leaned close, her voice low, eyes darting toward the glass. "Don't let them take what's left of you. I'll send someone to help." Her words were a lifeline in the sterile quiet, something to hold on to when everything else was slipping. I asked about my belongings, desperate for any tether back to myself. The orderly returned a plastic bag with torn clothes and shoes, but no bracelet. "Wasn't in the intake," he said flatly. I felt the loss like a second wound. It hadn't just been misplaced. Someone had taken it, just like they had taken the money. Through the half-closed door, I heard it again. Clinical words that chilled me more than the IV drip. Cross-match test for Kellen scheduled. Waiting on conditions. That word again. Conditions meaning my absence, meaning my death. The picture was no longer a blur. My parents weren't only neglecting me. They were moving pieces on a board, transferring money, stripping me of the last gifts I'd been given, preparing documents to erase me legally as well as physically. I was still breathing, still stitched together, but already treated as an obstacle in Kellen's story. May returned that evening, checked the room for shadows, and whispered, "Astro will come. Don't sign anything tonight." Her eyes held mine, fierce and steady, until I nodded. For the first time since the crash, I felt something other than despair. The betrayal was real, undeniable. But so was the spark of resistance, and I would need it, because the storm inside these walls was only just beginning. The social work office smelled faintly of disinfectant and old paper. A thin hum of a vent filled the silence as the door clicked. Shut behind us. Astroloma sat across from me, her voice low and steady as she slid a safety concern form onto the desk. My hands trembled as I gripped the armrest. "I heard them," I whispered. "They told the doctor to take my last kidney. The insurance money, it's gone. I'm scared." She met my eyes. No flinch. Just a slow nod, then turned her laptop toward me. On the screen was my own file. Page after page of medical and financial data. Under authorized representative sat my mother's name, Darlene Whitlock. A crisp digital signature next to it, Astroloma. Tapped the screen gently. "This was signed while you were under anesthesia," she said. "It gives them full control over your medical and financial decisions." My stomach clenched. Could almost feel the pen forced into my hand, even though I'd never touched it. Astroloma reached into her bag and pulled out a small silver USB stick. Its surface scratched from use. Our internal compliance team installed new mics in the hallways after a recent complaint. "What you're about to hear was recorded legally. It's yours to keep." She slid it across the desk. My fingers closed over it like it was a weapon. I plugged it into her laptop, and the room filled with their voices. Cold and unmistakable. My mother's command, "Take his organ, save our son, do it now." My father's tone, detached as ever. "He's just a burden." The words echoed through the speakers, making the small office feel like a courtroom. My throat burned. I didn't cry. I listened, letting every syllable burn itself into me, a counterweight to the helplessness they'd tried to leave me with. Astroloma turned off the recording. "This is enough to stop everything. I'm flagging your chart for potential coercion in organ procurement. Your family's access to you ends now." She picked up her phone, her voice calm but decisive as she instructed security to restrict visits, halt any testing or scheduling tied to cross-matching, and move me to a protected wing. Her actions were so quick and precise, I almost couldn't keep up. For the first time since the crash, I felt a barrier forming between me and them. Later, when I went to collect my belongings, a storage clerk spoke quietly as he handed me the bag. Some woman said she'd take the valuable stuff herself so it wouldn't get lost, he muttered. My pulse jumped. That woman was Darlene. My bracelet was in her hands, the last piece of me she could hold hostage. I asked for a transfer to another floor, changed the PIN code on my records, and signed a directive blocking the release of any information to my family. "I will not be their donor bank," I said aloud, my voice firmer than I expected. Astroloma looked at me and gave a small nod. As evening fell, Muffled voices rose in the hallway. Darlene's sharp tone pierced through the glass, arguing with a guard. "He's my son, I'll see him if I want." The guard refused. Astroloma stood by the door, her presence steady as she said softly, "You're not alone anymore." The sound of my mother's frustration faded down the hall, replaced by the soft click of the lock sliding into place. I closed my eyes and exhaled, the USB heavy in my pocket like a promise. When they finally discharged me, I left with nothing but a stitched body and a small bag of clothes. The bracelet was still gone. The air outside the hospital was damp and smelled of wet concrete. The sky over Asheville was the color of old tin. At the Hawthorne shelter, they gave me a thin blanket, a metal key, and a cot in a room that smelled of worn carpet and disinfectant. I lay there staring at the ceiling, feeling like society's leftover scrap. But the words I'd spoken in Astroloma's office still pulsed inside me. I would not be their donor bank. The shelter manager, a tired man with a kind face, told me matter-of-factly, "If you want to stay independent, you'll need work. We can't hold your bed forever." So, I went looking. A week later, I pushed open the door to Blue Ridge Pages, a 24-hour bookstore tucked between a pawn shop and a laundromat. The manager handed me a mop and a set of keys, asked no questions, and pointed to the back. I started that night, wiping down shelves while customers drifted through the aisles. The smell of old paper and ink clung to my clothes, oddly comforting. As I scrubbed the floors, I whispered under my breath, "These books will be my walls." In the corner of the store stood a battered computer no one seemed to use. During my breaks, I logged into online GED courses, my fingers trembling from fatigue but still clicking submit on each assignment. Each dollar I earned, I folded into a jar under my cot at the shelter. I called it the Aegis jar. One night past midnight, the store was nearly empty. I was restocking a cart of hardcovers when the phone on the counter rang. The sound sharp in the quiet. I hesitated, then picked up. "Milo, you're still there, aren't you?" "It's Mom." The voice on the line sent a jolt through me. She didn't even use my new name. I stayed silent. "You know Kellen needs more. Don't make this hard," she continued, her tone as smooth as ever, like she was asking me to bring milk home from the store instead of my own body. I hung up without a word, my hands shaking as I set the receiver down. My heart pounded against my ribs. They knew where I was. They knew my shift. They still saw me as theirs to harvest. I went back to mopping, but my mind raced. The bookstore had felt like a sanctuary, but now it was another glass room they could reach into. I pictured Darlene's ring, Victor's flat stare, the empty space on my wrist where my bracelet had been. When my shift ended, I stood outside in the cool mountain air, gripping the strap of my bag until my knuckles ached. In my pocket, Astroloma's USB pressed against my palm, solid and real. I closed my eyes and whispered, "If I disappear for real, who will speak?" The street was silent except for the low hum of distant traffic. I took a breath, the smell of rain mixing with paper and ink still on my clothes. I knew now that running wasn't enough. I had to build something stronger than escape. The courthouse smelled of varnished wood and stale coffee, and the fluorescent light buzzed overhead as I filled out the forms. Each stroke of my pen felt like cutting away a piece of the old me. Whitlock. That name had been written on every record, every insurance form, every whispered insult that reduced me to less than human. When the judge looked over his glasses and asked, "Why do you want to change your name?" My throat went dry, but I forced the words out. To survive. The silence after that felt like judgment itself. But then the gavel came down, a flat sound that seemed to mark the end of something. On the papers, in black ink, my new name was printed Valen Creed. Walking out of the chamber, I thought for a moment I was free. Then I saw him, Victor, standing at the far end of the hall, his hands behind his back, his eyes cold and fixed on me. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. Just seeing him there meant one thing. He knew. They hadn't let me go. I didn't stop walking. If he wanted me to tremble, I wouldn't give him that. Outside, the fall air stung my lungs, but it tasted cleaner than any breath I'd had in years. That night, I made myself a vow. Whitlock was dead. Violin Creed would not be hunted without claws. Through contacts May had passed to me, I found others who carried scars like mine, an overworked nurse, who had been pressured to forge consent forms, a young attorney who had seen families coerced into silence in probate, a programmer who'd been dismissed after discovering manipulated medical files. We gathered in the back of a diner, our voices low, notebooks scattered between coffee cups. Each of us had been broken open by a system that looked away. Together, we started to imagine something larger than our own wounds. I placed the USB in a small safe I bought secondhand, hiding it behind a stack of textbooks in my rented room. It became my talisman, my insurance that the truth couldn't be erased again. This is the last card. I told myself one day it will turn the table. We called our project Aegis Patient Rights Aegis, the shield. Our first tool was simple but vital, a hotline staffed by volunteers who understood coercion. Then a small app, coded by our friend, one button to alert legal aid if a patient felt unsafe. Later, we built a database, a vault of case studies and evidence. What I had once lacked, someone to believe me, was what we promised to others. At our first public community meeting in a church basement with peeling paint, I stood at the front adjusting the mic with nervous hands. Faces filled the folding chairs, ordinary people leaning forward with a hunger I knew too well. I spoke of rights, of dignity, of the truth that your body is yours alone. The words left me trembling, but they didn't falter. When the applause came, it felt like air filling a collapsed lung, and then as the crowd broke into groups, I saw him, a figure at the back, half-shadowed, the shape of his shoulders so familiar it made my pulse leap. Kellen, or someone who looked exactly like him. I stepped down, weaving through the chairs. But when I reached the spot, the seat was empty, still warm. My chest tightened. They knew I was alive, they knew I had changed my name, and they were watching. That night, back in my room, I opened the safe and held the USB in my palm. The day will come, I whispered, the words echoing against the quiet walls. And when it does, I'll be ready. The email from HR popped up on my screen in the middle of a routine morning. Subject line, candidate submission. I clicked without much thought, then froze at the name. Kellen Whitlock, my brother, the one they tried to save at my expense, had applied to Aegis. For a long moment, I just stared, half disbelieving, half laughing. After years of shadows, he had walked straight into my house. I told HR I would handle the interview personally. The glass conference room was set up before dawn. I placed 2 coffees on the table, steam curling faintly in the cold air, and laid the USB beside my notebook. It sat there like a blade unsheathed. In my folder, I had photocopies of the so-called authorization forms signed while I had been unconscious, evidence of theft dressed up as paperwork. Today, there would be no more silence. At 8 sharp, the door opened. Kellen stepped in, older now, shoulders slumped beneath a jacket that didn't quite fit, his eyes restless. He didn't recognize me at first, then his gaze caught mine, and the color drained from his face. His lips parted, stammering. You're alive." I didn't move. "Not just alive," I said evenly. "I remember everything." He sat, his hands trembling on the table. I slid the USB toward him. "Listen to it, hear their voices, hear yours." He flinched like it was hot iron. "I didn't know," he said quickly, desperately. "I didn't know they'd take it that far. Don't lie to me." I cut him off. "This room is the court you escaped, and I am the judge you never faced." For a moment, he was silent. Then his composure cracked. He pressed his palms to his face, voice muffled with sobs. "They sold everything. The house is gone. Dad's debts ate what was left. Mom, she's drowning. I have nothing. I need a chance." I leaned back, studying him. They had consumed everything, even themselves. The empire of Whitlock had burned to ash, and still the pattern repeated. Kellen, asking me to save what was broken by their greed. I stood, my chair scraping softly against the tile. Aegis exists to defend the betrayed, to shield the discarded, and to stop men like you from circling back for more. I picked up the USB, slipping it into my pocket. As I reached for the door, his voice cracked behind me. "Mom kept your bracelet. All these years, She said it was proof you owed them, that you'd come back for it. I paused, the weight of the words settling like ice. That bracelet had been my promise of life, stripped from me when they left me for dead. Knowing she still held it, twisting it into another chain, made my stomach turn. I opened the door without looking back. The glass closed between us, sealing the room like a verdict. I walked down the corridor, the USB heavy in my pocket, a storm pressing against my ribs. If I revealed everything, I could end the Whitlocks for good. The question pulsed in my mind, relentless. Would I do it? Or was survival enough? Rain slanted against the windows of my apartment in Asheville, a steady hiss that felt more like static than water. I had gotten used to living in small spaces, but that night the room felt even smaller, as if the air itself was waiting. When I opened the mailbox downstairs, a single envelope sat inside. My name written in a hurried scrawl I recognized instantly. My mother's handwriting. Back upstairs, I held it for a long time before tearing it open. The paper smelled faintly of perfume, but the words on it were raw. The house is going, Kellen can't find work, you're still our son, please help. It wasn't an apology, it wasn't even regret, it was a summons, like every other request they'd ever made. My chest tightened, but the panic I used to feel was gone. In its place was a calm, almost cold clarity. I sat at my desk, the USB drive next to me, its metal casing catching the glow from the streetlight outside. I thought of what it held. Voices. Signatures, dates, enough to end the Whitlocks completely. I imagined sending it to every news outlet, every regulatory board watching their name collapse. Under the weight of their own cruelty, my fingers brushed the empty space on my wrist where my bracelet had once been. My grandmother's words rose up through memory like a quiet tide. You have to choose to live for yourself. I pulled out a sheet of paper and began to write. The day I was unconscious, you chose Kellen. Live with that choice. The pen moved steadily, no tremor. When I finished, I folded the letter and sealed it without a return address. I slipped it into my coat pocket. On the way to the corner mailbox, the rain soaked through my hood and chilled my scalp, but my steps stayed steady. Under the awning of a closed shop, a figure stood smoking, the ember of his cigarette glowing in the dark. Victor? His gaze found mine, and for a moment it was like the hospital glass all over again. You still owe us, he said softly, almost conversationally. Blood doesn't change. I stopped a few feet away. Exactly, I said. That's why I changed my name. It was the first time I had spoken back to him without fear. He flicked the cigarette into the gutter, his face unreadable. Neither of us moved closer. It felt like a photograph, the last image of a war we both knew was ending. I crossed the street and dropped the envelope into the blue metal box. The flap clanged shut, final and echoing. That sound marked the closing of a door no court could open again. I was no longer Whitlock. I was Valen Creed. Back in my apartment, the rain beat harder against the glass. I opened my laptop to check the Aegis dashboard and froze at a new notification. Mission Hospital had announced a major initiative, CLA Protection Protocol, safeguarding patients from coercive organ practices. My name, hidden in the acronym CLA, glowed in the header. I stared at it until the letters blurred. Without releasing a single file, without a press conference, the truth had begun to surface on its own. The next day dawned gray and cool. The rain washed away, leaving the city muted under low clouds. I walked down to the French Broad River, following the path of wet leaves and morning joggers. The water moved slow and dark, reflecting a sky that hadn't yet decided whether to clear. In my palm, warm from my grip, was the silver bracelet Astroloma had returned to me weeks before, recovered from a staff locker after a quiet inquiry. It was scratched, now dulled, but it felt alive against my skin, like my grandmother's hand still closing over mine. I leaned on the railing, watching the current slide under the bridge. Headlines on my phone still showed the hospital's announcement. The protocol was official, a set of rules designed to stop what had been done to me from happening to anyone else. They'd named it for the person I had become, not the one they had tried to erase. Valen Creed existed on a legal document meant to protect strangers I would never, Meet it was both a victory and a strange kind of grief. The sound of gulls carried over the water. I closed my eyes, and images flickered through me like film frames. The hum of hospital lights. My mother's voice calling me a burden. The USB on the interview table between me and Kellen. The letter I had sealed without a return address. All of it lined up now. A single story with a beginning, middle, and end. My phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize lit up the screen. I let it ring, the sound thin and insistent in the quiet morning. I didn't answer. "This is the silence I choose," I murmured, sliding the phone back into my pocket. For the first time, the silence wasn't a void but a boundary. Around me, the city was waking. Delivery trucks on the bridge, the chatter of two cyclists passing, a dog barking somewhere upriver. I stood still, breathing it in. They thought ending me would be the last chapter. But standing there with the bracelet warm in my hand, I understood it was only the prologue. I turned from the river and walked back toward the street, my steps firm on the damp boards of the dock. My reflection in a shop window caught my eye. Not the hollow-eyed patient from a hospital bed, but a man who had built something from nothing and left his old name behind. The protocol would protect others. The company would grow. My story was no longer about survival. It was about building a world where no one had to endure what I had. The breeze off the river lifted my hair and carried the smell of fresh coffee from a nearby cafe. I tightened my grip on the bracelet and slipped it into my pocket. Freedom was no longer an idea, but a daily act. With each step away from the water, I felt the weight of the past loosen. I didn't know if the Whitlocks would ever call again or if I would ever see the bracelet returned, without shadows attached. But I knew one thing as the morning light broke over the river. This was my life now, and for the first time, it belonged only to me. The letter was gone. The mailbox shut like the lid on a coffin. And I told myself that was the last chapter. But life doesn't fold itself so neatly. Loose ends fray, even when you think you've burned them. I knew it the morning I woke to find an envelope slid under my apartment door. No stamp, no address, just my name written in a hand that shook. Inside was the bracelet. My bracelet. The silver circlet that had vanished the night my parents first called me a burden. No note, only the metal itself, scuffed and scratched but undeniably mine. For hours, I sat with it in my palm, running my thumb over the tarnished ridges. Was this an act of surrender or a taunt? Did they think giving it back would soften me, undo what they had carved into me? I slipped it on, and it clinked faintly against the desk. It fit tighter than before, as though my wrist had changed, grown into something harder. That night, I met Astroloma in the Aegis office. We sat in the glass-walled conference room, the same kind I had once faced Kellen in. I placed the bracelet on the table beside the USB. "They returned it," I said, "but it feels like a message." Astroloma leaned forward, her expression unreadable. "Then, answer with one of your own. We're not just fighting shadows anymore. The system has shifted. Mission, hospital went public because of you. Use that. Momentum." Her words lit something I hadn't wanted to admit. I was still holding back. I had never released the USB, never gone beyond our small circle. I had clung to it like a lifeline when maybe it was meant to be a weapon. 2 days later, at a regional symposium on patient rights, I took the stage. My heart pounded the same way it had in the church basement, but this time the room was larger, filled with reporters, doctors, lawyers. My voice didn't tremble. I spoke of coercion, of signatures stolen while patients slept, of insurance diverted into rings and debts. And then I played the recording, my mother's voice, cold as ice. "Take his organ, save our son, do it now." My father's echo. "He's just a burden." The room went silent. Every face turned to me. I let the words hang there, heavy and undeniable. "That was my family," I said, "but this is bigger than me. How many others are treated as disposable? How many others have voices silenced before they could even protest?" The story spread fast. Headlines carried the phrases that had been seared into me. Within days, State representatives called for inquiries. The USB was copied, archived, secured. For the first time, the truth wasn't something I carried alone. But with exposure came backlash. Anonymous emails filled my inbox. One night, a rock shattered the office window, a note tied to it. "You should have stayed quiet." I swept the glass myself, refusing to flinch. The others in Aegis grew wary, but I told them, "This isn't about me anymore. It's about everyone who's been cornered the way I was." Then came the final confrontation. Not in a courtroom, not in a hospital, but on a street in Asheville. I was walking home from the bookstore one evening when I saw him leaning against a lamppost. Victor. He looked smaller, clothes loose on his frame, the smoke from his cigarette curling upward into the twilight. "You've ruined us," he said flatly. "No," I replied. "You ruined yourselves. I just stopped pretending." He dropped the cigarette, crushing it under his shoe. "Your mother. She never forgave you." I shook my head. She never forgave me for surviving. For the first time, his eyes flickered, not anger, but something hollow, almost pleading. "We have nothing left." "I know," I said. "And I'll never owe you again." I walked past him, the sound of my steps louder than his silence. I didn't look back. At home, I opened the safe one last time. Inside lay the USB, now empty of secrecy. I placed the bracelet beside it, closing the door with a soft click. Evidence and memory. Both locked away. They had once chained me. Now they were just relics. Weeks later, Mission Hospital's CLA protocol rolled out statewide. Then nationally, Aegis received grants, volunteers, recognition. Our hotline rang daily with voices I'd once longed to hear when I was the one trapped. Voices trembling, searching, finding us. Each time I remembered that night in the hospital, my mother's words branding me a burden. Each time I answered anyway, proving her wrong. On the first clear morning of spring, I returned to the French Broad River. The air smelled of new leaves, and the water shone brighter than I remembered. I stood on the bank, sunlight spilling over me, the bracelet cool around my wrist. My grandmother's words echoed, "You have to choose to live for yourself." I whispered back, "I am." The phone buzzed in my pocket, another unknown number. I let it ring, watching the ripples cross the water. I had chosen my silence. I had chosen my voice. I had chosen my name. Valen Creed was not just alive. He was free, and he would never be a burden again. I've carried this story inside me for longer than I can measure, and telling it has felt like peeling back layers of scar tissue. Each layer hurt, but underneath was something worth showing. Proof that survival is not just possible, but powerful. When I think back to that hospital bed, my body stitched and weak, my parents whispering through glass about using me as spare parts, it feels almost like watching a stranger's life. And yet that stranger was me. I remember every sound, every word, every moment of disbelief that the people who gave me life could reduce me to less than human. There were nights I thought their voices were right, that I was just a burden, that maybe disappearing would be easier. But pain has a way of turning into clarity. With every betrayal, every theft of my dignity, something inside me hardened into a promise. That promise became my anchor. It told me to hold on, to gather proof, to trust strangers like Astroloma when my own blood had abandoned me. That promise carried me through nights in shelters, through exhaustion sweeping bookstore floors, through the cold silence of unanswered questions. I know my story sounds extreme, almost cinematic, but that's the point. Reality can be more brutal than fiction. Families betray, systems fail. The people you expect to save you can sometimes be the very ones trying to erase you. And yet here I stand. I changed my name. I rebuilt my life. And I turned what was meant to destroy me into something protective. Aegis, a shield, not just for me, but for anyone whose voice has been stolen. When Mission Hospital announced the CLA protection protocol, I realized something important. Justice doesn't always come in the form of revenge. Sometimes it comes quietly in the shape of a policy, in the form of a law, in the shift of a culture that finally admits what it did wrong. They used my name as an acronym, but to me, it was more than that. It was recognition that the boy they once called a burden had become the man who helped redraw the rules. Do I forgive them? That question lingers in every quiet moment. Forgiveness isn't something I owe. Not when the scars still ache and the memories still sting. But I don't live in their shadow anymore. They gave me rejection. I chose reinvention. They gave me silence. I built a voice. They tried to chain me to a name. I wrote a new one and made it stand for protection instead of pain. If you've listened this far, if you felt the weight of these words, I ask you for something simple. Stay with me. Let me know you're here. Write a comment, even just listening or hi. Tell me where you're watching from. Because every time I see those words, I'm reminded that my story reached further than the hospital walls, further than the Whitlock house, further than their silence. It reached people who understand, who know what it's like to carry invisible wounds and still get up every morning. And if you can subscribe to this channel, it's not about numbers. It's about building a space where stories like mine don't vanish in the dark. Every subscription, every share, every small sign of connection tells me that the shield I built isn't just mine anymore. It's ours. Together, we make sure no one else is left to fight behind glass, unseen and unheard. I'm not naive. I know there will be more battles. The Whitlocks are gone from my life, but shadows linger and systems don't transform overnight. But now I don't face those battles alone. I face them as Valen Creed, not the name they tried to bury. I face them with proof, with allies, with a voice that cannot be silenced. And I face them with you, because by listening you've become part of this story too. So thank you. Thank you for giving me your time, your attention, your presence. Thank you for letting my voice exist outside my own body. And thank you for reminding me that no matter how deep the betrayal, no matter how heavy the silence, connection can still be found. This isn't the end. It's the beginning of something larger than me. And if you're still here reading these words, then maybe it's the beginning of something for you too. Because if my story teaches anything, it's that no one is just a burden. No one is disposable. We all deserve to choose our lives, and that's exactly what I've done.